Welcome back to Women of Worth, the podcast where we dive into topics that inspire growth, confidence, and self-improvement. Today, we're going to talk about something that holds so many of us back: overcoming fear of failure and embracing growth. Whether it's the fear of making mistakes, being judged, or falling short of expectations, fear of failure is something we've all experienced. But here's the truth: failure isn't the end. It's part of the journey to success and growth. In today's episode, we'll be exploring why overcoming the fear of failure is so important for your personal and professional growth, the challenges you might face, and practical steps to move past that fear. We'll also share real-life stories of women who overcame their fear of failure and used it as a stepping stone towards success. Before we get started, if you're new here, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We release new episodes every week with tips and stories to help you grow and thrive. And if you know someone who's been struggling with fear of failure, share this episode with them, because we're all about supporting each other in our journeys. Now, let's dive in and talk about how you can overcome fear of failure and embrace growth.
Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive where we'll be tackling a topic so many of you wanted to explore: fear of failure and its impact on growth, especially for women. To guide our conversation, we'll be diving deep into episode 6, overcoming fear of failure and embracing growth.
It's amazing how this fear can manifest so differently for women, even though it's something we all experience.
It really is. It can feel like there's this invisible wall stopping you from taking risks. Whether it's going for that promotion or finally starting that business you've been dreaming about, what if this fear is actually making you miss out on amazing opportunities? Or even worse, what if it's stopping you from becoming your most resilient and creative self?
That's a really powerful way to think about it. Real growth, that kind of growth that matters, whether it's personal or professional, often happens when you step outside that comfort zone. And this isn't just about checking off a goal on your list. It's about realizing your full potential and becoming capable of achieving anything you set your mind to. And to bring this to life, we'll be sharing some really inspiring stories of women who transform their lives by facing this fear head on.
I love that. And one thing that stood out to me in the source material was how sneaky this fear of failure can be. It can disguise itself in ways we don't always recognize. Like sometimes it's straight up avoid. The source gave the example of Sarah, a marketing professional who was totally qualified for a leadership role. But that fear of not being good enough kept her from even applying.
Yeah, I've seen that happen so many times. And sometimes this fear shows up as perfectionism. Like think about Emma. She kept delaying her project because she was terrified of it not being absolutely perfect. Or Maria, who dreamed of opening a bakery for years, but never took the first step because she was scared of what people would think.
Oh my gosh, I feel that. That fear of judgment can be so paralyzing. And then there's this whole idea of self-sabotage. It's almost like you subconsciously get in your own way because deep down you don't believe you deserve success. Or maybe you think failing is inevitable. So why even bother trying? The source talks about Lisa, who kept quitting projects even though she had the skills to finish them. It's like she was setting herself up for failure.
Exactly. And what's important to understand is that these aren't just isolated cases. They represent these patterns of behavior driven by this underlying fear. And the source actually does a great job of explaining why breaking free from this fear can feel like such a struggle. It lays out 4 major challenges that really resonated with me.
Yes. And it doesn't just list them. It really delves into each one, which is so helpful. The first one, negative self-talk, is something I think we've all experienced at some point. It's that voice in your head constantly whispering doubts and anxieties. The one that's saying, I'm not good enough, or I'm going to mess this up.
Yeah, and that negativity can be so loud and overwhelming. Julia, who dreamed of starting her own business, is a great example. She was so talented and had great ideas. But those thoughts like, I'll never succeed, or I'm not talented enough, just kept replaying in her mind. It almost paralyzed her.
That's heartbreaking, but so relatable. And on top of that, there's the pressure of societal and cultural expectations, especially for women. It's like this invisible weight telling you to be the perfect mother, the successful professional, the supportive partner, all at the same time.
It's this constant juggling act, and the fear of dropping any one of those balls can be immense. It just intensifies that fear of failure because you're always worried about not meeting these often unrealistic expectations. It's almost like you're set up to feel inadequate no matter what you do.
Exactly. And then there's that feeling of isolation, like you're going through this struggle alone. The source highlights how lacking support can make facing these fears so much harder. It's like trying to climb a mountain, but you have no one to cheer you on or lend a hand when you stumble.
Yeah, you need that safety net, that sense of community to help you through it. Take Karen, for instance. She really wanted to go back to school, but she didn't have the support of her family. That fear of failing without a safety net kept her from taking that step for years.
It really shows how important it is to build that support system, those people who believe in you. And of course, there are those past failures, the setbacks that can cast these long shadows and make it even harder to try again.
Yeah, past failures can feel like you're carrying around this heavy baggage. It's totally natural to want to avoid repeating those experiences. Monica's story is a good example of this. She had a business venture that unfortunately didn't work out, and even though she learned so much from it, she was terrified to take another risk. She was scared of making the same mistakes again.
It's like that one failure becomes this defining moment that holds you back, even when you logically know you've learned and grown from it. So we've talked about how this fear can show up in these subtle ways, and we've explored why it's so hard to break free from it. But it's not all doom and gloom, right? The source also gives some really practical advice for overcoming these challenges and actually embracing growth.
Oh, absolutely. While the challenges are real, there are definitely ways to overcome them. And what I appreciate about the source is that it goes beyond those generic self-help tips. It provides real strategies that you can start using today.
I'm really excited to dive into those strategies. But before we do, let's take a moment to absorb everything we've talked about so far. It's a lot to process, and it's important to recognize how complex this fear is before we jump into solutions.
You know, it's so easy to get stuck in those what-if loops and all that anxiety, but the source really reminds us that we have the power to change how we see things.
Okay, I'm listening. But how do we actually do that? I mean, reframing failure, it sounds great in theory, but I'm guessing it's more than just trying to put a positive spin on something negative.
You're right. It's definitely not about just slapping a positive label on a bad experience. It's about changing how we fundamentally think about failure. Instead of seeing it as the opposite of success, what if we started seeing it as an essential part of the journey? Every setback, every mistake becomes this chance to learn and grow.
I love that, like turning those so-called failures into stepping stones towards something better. You know, Jessica's story really brings this to life. Her first product launch was a total flop. But instead of throwing in the towel, she figured out what went wrong and changed her strategy. And guess what? She ended up relaunching successfully. That's so inspiring.
Exactly. It's about resilience and being willing to learn from those missteps. Instead of asking, why did this happen to me? Try asking, what can I learn from this?
Okay, that's a great takeaway. I'm writing that down. But what about that voice in my head? You know, the inner critic that just won't shut up. That's where I get stuck.
Oh, that negative self-talk, it can be so sneaky and destructive. It's almost like we're programmed to focus on the negative, but the source really emphasizes that we have the power to fight back against those thoughts. We can actually rewire our brains.
Wait, rewire our brains. Now you've got my attention. Tell me more about that.
So it starts with noticing those negative thoughts. Instead of just letting them control you, you consciously replace them with positive and empowering beliefs. Like instead of saying, I can't do this, try saying, I'm capable, I'll figure it out.
I can see how changing the words you use could make a real difference.
Mm-hmm.
But is it really that easy?
Well, it's not always easy, but it is that powerful. The source even talks about specific techniques like cognitive reframing and thought stopping. These are really effective tools for breaking down those negative thought patterns. Do you remember Kelly's story? She used affirmations to combat her self-doubt, and it completely transformed her ability to overcome challenges.
Wow, I never thought about it like that. It's amazing how much our thoughts influence our actions and ultimately our results. Okay, so we've talked about reframing failure and challenging negative self-talk. But what about those times when you feel totally overwhelmed by how big your goal is? That's when I tend to freeze up.
Yeah, that's where setting small, achievable goals comes in. Instead of getting bogged down by this huge, scary end goal, break it down into smaller steps. Each small win gives you momentum and boosts your confidence, which makes the whole journey feel less intimidating.
Like the saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Mm-hmm.
Samantha's experience with writing a book is a perfect example. The whole process felt so overwhelming to her. But she started by setting a goal of writing just 200 words every day. And eventually, all those small steps added up to a completed draft.
Exactly. It's all about recognizing that even small, consistent actions can lead to incredible progress over time. And it ties into this idea of building self-efficacy, that belief in your own ability to succeed. Every small win reinforces that belief.
I love that. It's not about being perfect from the start. It's about strengthening that confidence muscle little by little. And speaking of support, the source also talks about how important it is to seek out mentors and guidance, especially when you're feeling doubtful.
That sense of community is so powerful. Having people who believe in you, who can offer encouragement and advice, can make a world of difference. Whether it's friends, family mentors, or even a mastermind group, surrounding yourself with positive and supportive people can really help you stay on track and motivated.
It's like having your own personal cheerleading squad cheering you on every step of the way. I remember Rachel's story. She was so afraid to launch her new service, but joining a mastermind group gave her the support and confidence she needed to take that leap.
That's especially important for women, you know. They often face all these societal pressures and expectations that can make those fears even worse. So we've talked about some really great strategies: reframing failure, challenging negative self-talk, setting small goals, and seeking support. But there's one more piece of the puzzle that the source talks about, and that's embracing a growth mindset.
Okay, I've heard that term before, but I'll be honest, it's always seemed kind of vague to me. Can you explain it in a way that makes sense for someone like me who tends to get stuck in those fixed mindset patterns?
Absolutely. A growth mindset basically means believing that your abilities and your intelligence aren't fixed. You can develop them through effort and learning. It's not about being perfect right away. It's about embracing the process of continuous learning and improvement. Challenges become opportunities to grow, not threats to your self-worth.
So it's not about being naturally good at something. It's about recognizing that you can get better at anything with practice and effort.
You got it. And Claire's story really illustrates this point. She struggled with perfectionism for years, but once she shifted her focus from trying to get everything right to seeing challenges as opportunities to learn and grow, her whole approach changed. She became more confident and less afraid to take risks.
So if we're embracing a growth mindset, failure isn't a sign that we're not good enough. It's valuable feedback. It helps us improve and become more successful in the long run. It's almost like we're training ourselves to be okay with feeling uncomfortable.
Exactly. It's a fundamental shift in perspective that lets us see setbacks not as roadblocks, but as detours that can ultimately lead us to where we want to be. And sometimes those detours can even lead us to something even better than we originally imagined.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. We've uncovered so much about how fear of failure shows up, the challenges it creates, and most importantly, the practical steps we can take to overcome it. But before we wrap up, I'm curious, what are your final thoughts? What's the one key takeaway you want our listeners to leave with today?
You know, I think the biggest takeaway is that fear is just part of being human. It's especially common when we're trying to push ourselves beyond our comfort zone, trying new things.
Yeah, that makes sense. But then how come some people seem to have no fear at all? Are they just wired differently?
Not really. It's not about getting rid of fear completely. Even the most successful people, those who achieve those really big goals, they still experience fear. The difference is that they don't let it control them. They've learned to acknowledge it, learn from it, and keep moving forward.
So it's not about not feeling fear. It's about how we react to it that matters most.
Exactly. Every successful person you can think of has faced setbacks, made mistakes, and probably had a ton of self-doubt along the way. What sets them apart is that they didn't give up. They got back up and kept going.
It's so encouraging to hear that, to realize that failure isn't the end of the story. It's often just the beginning.
That's the power of a growth mindset. It's about changing your thinking from "I can't do this" to "I can learn how to do this," or even "I'm not there yet."
I love that. It takes away the pressure of having to be perfect right from the start.
And as you start using these strategies, making those small changes in how you think about failure and growth, remember to celebrate each victory. Every step you take, no matter how small, is proof of your courage and your dedication to growing.
That's a really good point. It's easy to get caught up in the big picture and forget to appreciate those little wins along the way.
Definitely. And don't forget, you don't have to do this alone. Lean on your support system, those people who believe in you. And if you stumble, which everyone does, don't be afraid to ask for help. Sometimes just talking about it with someone you trust can make a huge difference.
This deep dive has been so insightful. We've really broken down this whole idea of fear of failure and explored some amazing strategies for overcoming it.
I hope you're leaving today with some new tools and a fresh perspective that gives you the power to go after your dreams, take risks, and never stop growing.
Absolutely. To our amazing listener, remember that you are capable of incredible things. Don't let fear hold you back. Embrace the journey, learn from your experiences, and never stop believing in yourself. We're cheering you on every step of the way. And if this episode resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.